It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth, financial literacy educator and speaker, entrepreneur, and chairman of the board of Bank Information. Take charge of your financial future with Your Personal Bank. Now here's Ference Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. Well, it's official. Recently, the Consumer Price Index just came out that the inflation is 7% year over year. Folks, that's the highest reading. That's the highest increase of inflation since 1982, which is the tail end of the 1970s high inflation era. The saddest part about all that is it wasn't surprising. In other words, it was expected. Now, there's some things about that. We're going to talk about that a lot today, of course, because from a financial economic standpoint, inflation, is one of the most insidious and one of the most impactful financial situations that can impact average Americans, of all income levels, frankly. But unfortunately, it tends to affect those in the middle class or even lower income people even more. So why is the inflation the way it is? Well, unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know that there's really two main causes for the inflation. And one is, to be absolutely fair, is the economy was shut down for COVID, of course, about almost 2 years ago now. And the economy has been opening back up. So you don't just shut down an engine like the U.S. economy. I mean, there's so many moving parts and aspects of it, and then just, seamlessly turn it back on. It takes time for things to get readjusted, re-going again, if you so to speak. And that's where some of the supply chain issues have been impacted, of course, and things like that. That's very real, which shortage of goods, with more dollars chasing the goods causes the prices to go up, which is the very definition of inflation, of course. So there is some of that aspect, and like when the Federal Reserve over the past year, better part of 2021, was talking about how inflation was transitory, and many experts were arguing otherwise, and I was saying the same thing, because to me it was just common sense. Certainly a portion of it was, but I don't think Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve was really, was really fully comprehending, or they were just ignoring, I'm not sure what, or they live in a bubble, or there are political considerations. I don't know the reasons behind it completely, but the reality is they weren't looking at the full picture. Yes, it was true. Some of the inflationary causes and supply chain issues were caused, and we're dealing with still, from the result of shutting down an economy and then trying to reopen it. But even the Federal Reserve now has come to the conclusion that it's not transitory. It could be with us for quite a long time, because there's actually bigger factors involved that are causing inflation. And one of those bigger factors are the amount of money that's been spent, helicoptered into the economy by the federal government. In about a year and a half, over $6 trillion of spending was helicoptered. It's like just dumping cash into the system, right? Also, we had the Federal Reserve purchasing assets, buying bonds and mortgage-backed securities to the tune of $120 billion a month, starting in mid-2020 or so, to try to ease some of the effects of shutting down the economy due to COVID. But the reality is, it's printing money, folks. It's creating money out of thin air. In other words, there's more and more dollars, again, chasing goods and services, which forces the prices to go up. The good news about all of this, and then one other factor that's coming into play to cause some shortage of goods and services, which means there's more dollars chasing these goods. There's a couple of things. One, people have been cooped up for the better part of a year or two in many parts of the country. We've talked about that, depending on where you live. And now that people are getting back out, they've been cooped up. They haven't had much, they haven't had the time or been able to go do a lot of things to spend money on it. I can say, for example, our own family, we haven't traveled as much as we used to in the last 2 years. We certainly don't go out to eat as nearly as often as we used to. And that's true. You take that times tens of millions of Americans, We don't go to the store and shop as much as we used to. Okay. And, that just compounds, right? So, in other words, a lot of people, the savings rate went up. People spent less. That's not necessarily a bad thing, in my opinion, but I'm just talking about the different causes of this. So when you factor that in, and then also, and I did a show on this a while back where I was sharing prior to the elimination of the additional benefits that people were getting, unemployment benefits. Depending on the state you lived in, a family of four, if you qualified for all the different benefits, a family of four in 29 states, I believe it was, in the U.S., could earn over $100,000 a year. That's a husband, wife, 2 kids, right? Well, if you're not in a high-paying job and you're actually making more money staying at home than you are working, really, why would you go to work? Now, some do because they have a work ethic and all that, but a lot of people don't. And, I can't, it's hard to blame those people, right, for staying home because that kind of money is available. So now you have a shortage of workers to stock the shelves, to do the transportation, to move the goods and services so they are available, and then you're paying a substantial portion of them to stay home and not work, which creates a greater shortage of workers. It just all compounds and adds upon itself, right? It's all these artificial influences, primarily our federal government and some state governments, has placed on our economy to just gum up the works and just mess up the machine. What the really sad part about this is, and not getting into any political discussion at the moment, irregardless of how you felt about the prior administration, the facts on the matter is there's no argument that from anyone that the economy, was but prior to the COVID shutdowns, was humming along really well. Some of the best economic scenario we've seen, highest employment levels we've seen just about in history. So our economy was at almost the best it's ever been, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. Again, less government interference, less government regulation. Those were some of the big factors. A reduction of business taxes to be more competitive to other countries around the world. Look, raising taxes on businesses makes no sense absolutely whatsoever. And anyone that understands economics 101, just the very basics, should understand this. This is basic financial literacy, folks. So here's why it's so important. Businesses don't pay taxes. In fact, the consumer does, the customer does. In other words, the business, if they get taxed more, they're just going to raise their prices or reduce their quality or cut back their workforce or what other expenses. In fact, it's been proven that whenever a business tax is increased, something like 70% of it is passed on to the consumer and about 30% of it is reduced expenditures. And the biggest expenditure businesses reduce is employment, hiring. So raising taxes on businesses is not effective at all. Very, very ineffective, very inefficient. And especially when your tax rates are higher in your country than most other countries around the world, and many of these companies are global international companies, right? And you're competing around the world. It becomes very inefficient. So by lowering those business taxes and reducing regulations, government regulations, you allow the industry, the engine of capitalism, the engine of business to run. We have a very, very powerful business engine in the United States. We've had a history of opportunity and capitalism and entrepreneurship and all those kind of things. It was very healthy just 2 years ago. And think about it. What has caused it? What has created all this inflation and all these other problems and gummed it up? These shortages and all these different things, supply shortages, everything. Government interference. And this is why I've said this so many times. I was not a political guy. I didn't talk about politics very much. In fact, this show wasn't when I started about a year before COVID, it was not about politics at all. I talked about financial stuff, strictly. And the thing that got me, the thing that said, wait a minute, what's going on, is when the government started shutting down businesses using COVID as the excuse. Now, we're finding out more and more through the science that people weren't getting COVID that way for the most part. And whether you agree with that or not, that's the science, that's the facts. But the bottom line is, to me, that's not even important. To me, it should have been an issue of, hey, we're big boys and girls, and if we feel like there's a risk, let us assess the risk and decide what we're going to do for ourselves. So if we're going to wear a mask, take a vaccine, if we're going to go to the store or go out to eat or not, that's up to us. We're adults, and we have the freedom. We should have the freedom to make those decisions. And I had a real serious problem with a government coming in and saying to a small business owner, you can't operate. Just flat out, arbitrarily. We saw so many situations, and that's what was so frustrating about it, where a restaurant, for example, was shut down, couldn't operate, but then a catering facility not even 100 feet away was able to operate for like a movie set. I remember showing that some time ago. And they were doing exactly the same thing. They set up some tents and they fed these people. And this lady had this restaurant right there, not even 100 feet away. But they got an exemption because they were a movie company, which means they had political clout. There were millions of examples like that. And the sad part about it is when the government does that type of thing arbitrarily, it picks winners and losers. And that is not freedom. That is not democracy. And that is not the country I grew up in. That's not the country I served in the military for. And that's not the freedoms that I continue to support. So whether it was COVID or any other reason, frankly, in my opinion, it was unconstitutional. It was wrong. And frankly, morally wrong on every level. I'm glad that people are finally coming around to these facts. I was one of the early ones, but people are coming around, and we're seeing it in the polls and various things like that. And people are questioning the heavy hand of government and really questioning whether that's the type of government we want, the kind of society that we want going forward. So I think a lot of good is going to come from this, and we're seeing some of it already. I'm going to talk about that further in the next segments of this show. So I'm going to really encourage you to stay tuned, because as infuriating as some things that are going on, there's some really exciting news also. So stay tuned.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. So like I said in the first segment, if you didn't hear before, inflation for 2021, year over year, increased 7%. Highest rate we've seen since 1982, which is the tail end of the 1970s high inflation era. That is horrendous news, and it is causing the Federal Reserve to change their tune significantly, which finally, I think is far, I've talked about this many times, far behind the eight ball on this. There's some reasons behind it, I believe, but the Federal Reserve is finally starting to, instead of having easy monetary policy that we've seen for since 08-09, they're changing their tune. They're stopping purchasing of bonds and mortgage-backed securities, and they're also talking about raising interest rates 3 to 4 times in 2022. Now, folks, that's going to make some major changes to our economic picture. It's going to make changes to your portfolio, returns on investments, real estate, cryptocurrencies, precious metals. It's going to affect literally just about everything. So one of the things I'm going to say, and I was saying this in last week's show, if you didn't hear it, look, if there is ever a time you should review your portfolio, now's the time. And the reason I say that is really simple. The Federal Reserve has been pretty straightforward. They've had an easy monetary policy for the last 12 years or so. In other words, they didn't really change their tune very much. Very little changed. This is a major change and shift in what they're doing. And it's the first time we've seen that in over a decade. So, again, if you want to look at your portfolio, look at your situation, look at diversifying, reducing taxes, increasing the rate of return on your money, creating positive arbitrage, all those kind of things, by all means, contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, that's 866-268-4422. Now, I mentioned the Federal Reserve has been far behind the eight ball, in my opinion. And some of the reasons behind that, and again, this is just opinion, but I believe there were some political considerations, particularly for the chairman, Jerome Powell. The politics over the last administration and the current one have been, really been heavily towards easy monetary policy, keeping the interest rates low. We've gotten addicted to that kind of thing. Business has, certainly. And so there was a lot of pressure, we'll put it that way, to keep interest rates low. And Jerome Powell wanted to be renominated for a second term. He served a 4-year term. He just did, and he's now going to be the chairman for the next 4-year term. He's already started changing his tune pretty quickly because inflation, again, highest levels we've seen in 40 years. That's powerful. And he's got some freedom now because it's not like he's trying to get elected for another term. Most chairs, Federal Reserve chairs, serve for two 2-year terms. That's the norm. I'm sorry, 2 4-year terms. So 8 years total. That's the norm. And so I don't think he expects to get another term after that. So it's kind of like he's got more of a free hand. You know what I mean? And so my hope is he's been the previous 4 years. He's, in my opinion, been far too easy on monetary policy. Should have allowed interest rates start to ease back up to norms, to have a more healthy economy instead of one that's built upon easy monetary policy for so long. And then when COVID hit, they started buying quantitative easing, where they were printing more money and buying bonds and mortgage-backed securities. I understood why they were doing it initially in mid-2022, but again, they're still doing it today. They should have stopped that, I think, a year ago, probably. Okay, they're like about a year late, but I guess better late than never. My hope is he becomes more hawkish and more firm on raising the rates and getting things back to a more normal, which would create overall a healthier economy. Now, understand something about this when I say, and this should carry a little bit of weight. I'm busy all the time. I've been doing this for 22 years, helping people reduce market risk, reduce taxes, create positive arbitrage, all these kinds of things. But there's no question that I'm busier. I have more clients reach out to me in economic times where markets and stuff are more uncertain or things are not going so well. I mean, there's no two ways about it. In other words, if inflation continues and the stock markets and real estate markets go into some significant corrections, I believe we're going to see some of that, I get busier. So the reality is, from a personal financial standpoint, from my business, I'm at my busiest because when people have a lot of fear, concern about or uncertainty about what's going on, they want to diversify and all that. But that's not what I wish on people. I'm actually personally not an optimist, and I like to see people do well. And I think your personal bank helps people enhance their returns, even when things are going well. Also, obviously, when they're not going so well. My point is, I think it works good in all markets, up, down, sideways, all economies, whatever. But I think it significantly enhances your financial situation. But the reality is, I don't like to see people hurting. And when inflation is high, there's a lot of people that are hurting. There's no two ways about it. Or their hard-earned money, their money they put away, they save, maybe their entire life, okay, is under threat or is reduced significantly because of inflation and bad economies and things like that. So my point is, I wish the best for people. I want to see people do well. I want to see America do well and be healthy economically. But from a business standpoint, I always do well, but I do even better when it's not. It's kind of funny when people, and the reason behind it is, even though your personal bank works, again, like I said, in all different market cycles, economic cycles. It's when things are going well, it's just human nature. People are going to, not really looking to change anything because, hey, stuff's going well, they're doing fine. It's when things aren't going so fine or they're concerned about the future, like now, as valid reason to be concerned, there are going to be significant changes. That's when they'll kind of take the time to, look at making changes, and they'll reach out to somebody like me or look at doing something different because what they're doing, although maybe it did work before, they recognize it may not work so well in the future. You see what I'm saying? So my hope is, again, the Federal Reserve gets to a situation where they get a more moderate stance, not be so easy on their monetary policy. They're going to have to make some changes, some fairly significant changes, to get a handle on this inflation problem because it's not going away soon. Even the Federal Reserve is stating that now, admitting that finally. And if our and that's assuming our federal government doesn't go out and spend a whole bunch more money. We still have people in the government who are trying to pass more bills, more spending measures, and all this kind of stuff. And that would just be like throwing gas on a fire that's out of control. You've got a forest fire burning. You've got to put this thing out. And we got people out there still wanting to throw gas on it. Now, there's some good news in that front, too, because, and I'm going to talk about that in the next segment, by the way, is because some of the political situation and the things that have been going on are making that less and less likely that our federal government is going to be spending money recklessly like a drunken sailor like they've been doing for the past year or so. So that, in a way, actually is good news. So I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment because I'm going to talk about that further and some of the things that we can do and what we need to look out for going forward. So I'm going to encourage you not to miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to Your Personal Bank Show. And if you hadn't heard before, inflation year over year has gone up 7% in 2021, which is the highest rate we've seen in 40 years, and is very bad news for a lot of people because, see, inflation is also known as a hidden tax. Because when you pay more for goods and services, because there's too many dollars chasing too few goods and services, then you're paying more for stuff. So it's in effect like being taxed on it, right? So your dollars don't go as far. Yes, wages have gone up, but not nearly as much in most cases as inflation. So actually, the wage gains that many people did see this past year, sadly, they still moved backwards because of the high inflation. And the thing is, the inflation affects just about everybody, but it does affect the middle class and the lower class more because, well, there's some things that you just can't get away with not purchasing. And that's things like food, energy, transportation, typically. And that affects just about everyone. And so if a higher percentage of your income is going to the basic necessities, you have less. You have less to live on. You have less to put away for the future. And you're financially, you're struggling more. So it's really sad that this is happening. There's a lot of causes behind it. If you missed it, go to yourpersonalbank.com. You can listen to this if you missed this previous segments of this show, and you can listen to this or any of the previous shows. And if you want to know what you can do to help offset that, make your money go farther, reduce your taxes, you need to maximize your efficiency on everything today, even more than before because of the inflation. Contact me at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Now, as I was starting to say, what could cause inflation to continue? The Federal Reserve has stated it's going to be around for a while. We're probably going to be dealing with this at least for another year or two. That's according to the Federal Reserve. And I think they're being conservative, frankly, because inflation is one of those things that's much easier to prevent than cure. And we've got it. We're here. So the thing is, what could cause it to last longer or go further? Well, one of the greatest causes of the inflation we're dealing with is excessive government spending that we've seen over the last year or so. And I've been very, very adamant about this. If you listened at any time, you know this on this show, that I've consistently been stating, look, inflation, the government spending has got to stop. These excess deficits and excess spending has got to stop because eventually we're going to get ourselves to the point where we're going to be forced to stop. And that's not going to be fun or pleasant. So either grow up and be mature and financially responsible about the mess that we've created, that's been created. Okay, maybe we didn't create it ourselves, but the mess that's been created by, and this is valid for both parties over the last several decades, but certainly been piled on this past year or so, then we clean this mess up, or we're going to pay for it through probably things like austerity measures we saw about a decade ago in Greece. And folks, it'll be forced upon us, and that won't be fun. So we either voluntarily start getting a little bit responsible, or it'll be forced upon us. And the good news is, because so many of these decisions and actions that our federal government in particular and some of our state governments have made in terms of spending money, and they're still some of them are still talking about spending more, but it's become so unfavorable, the likelihood of that happening is decreasing, every week. And that's good news. So the one positive I see from historically low approval numbers for Biden, for example, are the fact that his ability to get things done and the Democrats who are in charge is increasingly unlikely. Because remember, they were wanting to spend another $5 trillion on Build Back Better. And it's not $1.7 trillion like the Democrats were saying, or zero like Biden was saying, which was a complete joke. But according to the Congressional Budget Office, about $5 trillion, which would have just, again, thrown gas on a wildfire that's already out of control. That's just nuts. That's crazy. That's craziness. And as long as the Democrats and the leaders in charge continue to push this craziness, I know it frustrates a lot of people. I've talked to so many people over the last year or so about, and how many of them are just frustrated by the total lack of common sense on so many of these things that our government is doing and our leaders are trying to do. Here's the good news. Here's the bright side. I'll share some more of these things in the next segment, but then I'm going to also share the bright side. The positive or the bright side is this. This is human nature. The pendulum tends to shift one way and the other. And the farther the pendulum, when it over shifts one direction, it's going to correct harder back. I mean, I'm old enough as a kid, I remember Carter, and then we got a Reagan, okay? That was a dramatic shift in political direction of the country. We've had other times like that where it was like the Great Depression was another one of those. In other words, what I'm trying to say is I see, because they're pushing so hard and continue to do so, a generational shift coming up, and it's going to start with the midterm elections later this year. Stay tuned in the next segment. I'll talk about some of this stuff further, and again, what we can do and what to look for, so don't miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. Well, like I've been saying, and this is something I'm going to keep drilling this so people don't forget, inflation went up 7% year over year in 2021. The highest rate we've seen in 40 years, back since 1982, which was the tail end of the 1970s high inflation crisis that we dealt with. This is not good news for most people, and we need to adapt and address this and focus accordingly with our investments, with our portfolio, with how we save money. We need our money to go farther. So one of the biggest things I'm going to tell you is positive arbitrage. Earning interest on money you spend is going to be a huge key going forward to continuing to build wealth. And Your Personal Bank does that. Reducing taxes also, because if you have less going out, you can keep more. So that's going to be a huge factor. Diversification is going to become huge because with the Federal Reserve raising interest rates 3 to 4 times this year, which is what they're saying they're going to do, and stopping purchasing bonds and mortgage-backed securities, which those types of things have been inflating the prices of real estate and the stock market. That's just a fact, folks. By them stopping those things, they're going to be stopped by March of 2022. That will have an impact on the values of many stocks and real estate for the most part. So this is going to impact people in many, many different ways. And what has worked for the last decade plus may not necessarily work going forward. So I'm going to encourage you to reconsider Time to review your plan, look at options like your personal bank to, again, make your money go farther, right? And contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com for more info. Now, I want to share some things here that are, on one hand, frustrating and sometimes even infuriating, but also encouraging. Because I was stating in the last segment, when the pendulum shifts too far in one direction, and it's clear by far that the leaders of the Democratic Party, Biden, etc., have gone far, far to the left or progressive of what the average American wants. Joe Manchin himself, Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat, stated, whereas this is a center-right country. They've gone far to the left politically on all these things. People aren't happy, and polls are showing that, okay? But here's the thing. They continue to push it. They continue to push that way because I think for several reasons. One, I don't think they don't know what else to do, and many of them are ideologues. In other words, they don't really care what other people think. They're so entrenched in their ideas, so steeped in their ideas, and they think that they're so right, I guess, or they crave power that to that degree, they're oblivious. So you have a blind spot. They always say absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, they found themselves in a situation where they got in control, so suddenly, surprisingly, I don't think anybody expected the Senate, for example, to go 50-50 when you had two Georgia runoff elections, remember? I mean, and for the Republicans to lose both of those, I don't think any reasonable person thought that was going to happen. They suddenly found themselves in power. And then on top of that, they got a president who ran as a moderate. In fact, Biden even said himself, what do I look like, a radical, T-Man? Come on. He ran as a moderate and then started day one, shutting the Keystone Pipeline, for example, and many other things he's done since, went far left. I mean, even AOC has stated how surprised she was how Biden has administration has gone far left. She's pleased. Far more progressive. And again, the progressives are not progressive. They're regressives. They're regressing to a lesser form of government. But the way Biden, his administration has operated, has pleased AOC, which might make some people in New York and California happy, but not most of the rest of the country. Okay? So by continuing to push this stuff, and I think it was done, I heard Dan Bongino say this a while back, as frustrating as it is, I think it's probably a good thing because it's something our country needed. We needed this wake-up call. And we've recognized that if we don't stand up and protect our freedoms, we're not going to have them forever. You know what I mean? But again, here's some crazy things like talk about Education Secretary Cardona solicited the letter comparing protesting parents to domestic terrorists. This is a public record. It's a privacy, whatever. It's public record now. In other words, the U.S. Education Secretary, Biden's Education Secretary, asked the National School Board Association to write a letter to the FBI asking for help in calling parents domestic terrorists. So they were all involved working together on this. This is incredibly, it's not shocking from some of all the other stuff we've seen, but it shows how corrupt and how power hungry they are. They just want control over anything at power and control. These bureaucrats and many of these politicians. And this is the kind of stuff, though, again, when they mobilized the FBI, it started calling parents domestic terrorists. I said this when it happened. You guys are underestimating the power and the dedication of parents. Look, you can go after people's money, you can go after a lot of things, but if you go after my kids, most parents will die for their kids, right? Any good parent would. So there's no ends that parents will go to protect their kids, right? And so when the government went after parents, I said that was a big, big mistake. This doesn't go liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, political belief or not. This is my kids. Okay? We saw that with the governor race in Georgia, in Virginia just a few months ago. And I think we're going to see this nationwide. They overstepped. They're so much ideologues They're so much in the bubble. They don't even realize how badly they stepped in it, I think. And then this COVID school closures, there are still teachers unions fighting to stay closed, or have so up until recently, almost 2 years into this. And the Omicron variant, which is the massive majority one, the science says it's basically no more than it's similar to a cold. And if you are vaxxed or whatever and you do get it, the symptoms are very mild. So the teachers unions were wanting to stay closed basically over a cold or a flu. Which is ridiculous. But again, and the profound negative consequences on the kids and everything else. But here's the good news. One, those kind of people shouldn't be teaching, in my opinion. Two, I've got another article talking about how over 230 colleges and who knows how many high schools have critical racism, teaching racism, folks. That's what it is. Anything involving critical race theory is separating people by skin color, is racism by definition. So I don't want these people teaching our kids racism, okay? So that's a good thing. Plus, parents are stepping up, taking over school boards, running for school boards. They're the real heroes, right? They're taking back. I think we're seeing a huge taking back control of our country. Look, we were asleep at the wheel, but this stuff is waking people up. And then, we've seen some of the more recent stuff where things like Americans are being denied COVID treatment based on race. Again, more racism. What is it with this stuff about dividing people by race? And by the way, if you keep, being called a racist used to be a stigma. They've used it so much. They've overused it. Now it's almost like a badge of honor. It means if somebody called you a racist, progressives calling you a racist, at this point, you're counterculture, man. You're cool. You're probably right. You can wear it as a badge of honor. People aren't scared of it anymore. And that's a great thing. And then like the whole thing about Anthony Fauci, more and more stuff's coming out on this guy. He's lied repeatedly under oath. This is now proven with emails and things, talking about where he lied about supporting the gain of function research and stuff like that. He did. His NIH did. So in other words, American taxpayer dollars ultimately ended up in China lab and probably created the virus that's got now killed a couple million people, according to their numbers, whatever it may be. The reality is, we created it, and he's the guy in charge of all this. This is a guy that's probably going to go down in history as one of the worst, most evil people, Anthony Fauci I'm talking about, in history, and responsible for some of the largest number of deaths in the world in history. Okay? You start getting involved with those kinds of numbers where a couple million people died, you're now talking about dictators like Hitler and Stalin and people like that. You see, my point is the truth comes out. The stuff is coming out. First, people were censored for saying it. Now, even the CDC and even people who are on the liberal side of things are now saying it. Okay, because the proof is there. The emails are there. And if you still don't believe this, I'm going to say whatever you're listening to, you need to do a little research of your own, because you're listening to some propaganda. And, even we have a Supreme Court Justice, Sonia Sotomayor, who talked about having 100,000 children in serious condition on many on ventilators. And even the head of the CDC the next day said, that's not true. And we have no more than like 3,000 or so kids that have COVID, and almost none of them on ventilators. And many of them were... they were there not because of COVID, but because they happen to have COVID, but they were there for other reasons. I mean, the level of BS that's been spouted out there, and propaganda, even by a Supreme Court justice, ridiculous. But let me give you a couple more. As I say, these kinds of things people are finally pushing back, and saying it's so ridiculous. Even the most dyed-in-the-wool Democrat liberal who has any kind of cognitive thinking, starting to question these things. I'm talking to some of them, and it's so ridiculous. But let me give you another one. Governor Newsom of California now proposes universal health care for illegal immigrants. And they're talking about funding state-funded abortions, and they're also talking about doubling the state income tax. They already have the highest income tax in the country. If they double it, what do you think that's going to do to California? You think people are moving out that now? Just wait if they pass that. They'll just absolutely destroy that state. And maybe that'll finally be the straw that broke the camel's back and get people in California to wake up and realize one-party rule, Democratic one-party progressive rule, is detrimental. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Hopefully it is. And then this last thing, we got Biden going around. One of his most recent speeches in Georgia about calling people if they don't support his in essence federal takeover of elections and allowing people to vote, do ballot harvesting and no voter ID and all these things, which the vast majority of Americans of both stripes, all political parties disagree with. Okay, because it makes cheating easier. Okay, so this bill, these bills they want to pass, will create will allow cheating voting easy. It can become easier, fraudulent voting and stuff. Well, the majority of people are against it, right? But he's basically saying, look, if you don't support this, you're no better than George Wallace or Jefferson Davis. I mean, come on, man. Really? It's that kind of stuff where he's going over the top. Over the top. These are people that are desperate. They're frantic. They're recognizing their power trip. That the power. Understand, folks. Power is their game. They're realizing it's coming to an end soon. And if they were trying to, overturn the filibuster in the Senate and stuff like that, that kind of rhetoric, that kind of talk is not going to get senators like Manchin or Sinema here in Arizona to vote for overturning this filibuster, because they know they'll get tossed out on their next re-elections. So what I want you to understand is there's a lot of good reasons to be excited about the future. Chin up. Be encouraged. Good things are happening. We just got to get through the rest of this year, and stuff will start getting better. I firmly believe this. Contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com for more information.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guest on this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Products and writers may have limitations and may not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Compare when considering a replacement. Dividend rates and baseline of credit rates may change. Contact yourpersonalbank.com for current rates.